Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 23 playthrough of the Colorado Rockies. We have just completed the 2054 season, and the Rockies won their third consecutive World Series. Was a little bit of a disappointing regular season, 97 wins for the first time in 3 seasons. We didn't top 100 wins. We didn't have the best record in baseball, but we still got the job done when it mattered the most, taking the World Series 4 games to 1, and you can see we were 11-1 in the playoffs. Just an incredible run by this Rockies team to close out our long-term playthrough in OOTP 23 in fine style. We will be beginning a long-term OOTP 24 playthrough over the next couple of weeks. Probably going to wait until at least one patch, maybe two, has been released. Kind of have heard some mixed assessments of how stable the platform is right now, and don't want to get into a long-term play and find out that part of the game is broken. But in the meantime, we're going to be finishing up this series, taking a look back at our 33 years as a GM in OOTP 23 with the Royals, the Pirates, and most recently the Rockies. So if you haven't subscribed to the channel, would sincerely appreciate it if you found us over the last few days with OOTP 24 coming out. Hope that you'll stay here and follow our subsequent long-term play. And before we start that long-term play, we will be doing some other interesting things, continuing to put out some OOTP 24 videos, but not in a series that we're going to keep going on for months and possibly close to a year at a time. But there's going to be no rest for the weary as we try to get this Colorado team set up to have a different general manager defend their title and go for 4 in a row next season. Robbie Carrillo, who had an incredible playoff run, was the MVP of the NLDS as well as the MVP of the World Series, has opted out of his contract. We've got decision years that we need to make on Javi Toledo, starting pitcher, and Tawase Adebamge, who's been a reliever for us the last couple of years since coming over from South Africa. Taking a look at the season goals, goal was to win the championship. We did that. We did not increase the profit, but he's thrilled with what the team has become. 3 out of 3 in World Series, one of the greats of all time in his opinion. So he's happy with what we've done, ecstatic with our performance. Ownership is pleased, and we even got a small bump to the budget for next year to $348 million from the $344 that we were at this season. But you can see right now we've only got $16 million available for free agents, $20 million for extensions, and we are going to have some big-time holes to fill on the team, most notably Carrillo, who we mentioned opted out of his contract. We've also got decisions on Javi Toledo and Tawase Adebamge, as I mentioned. And then Jose Maravilla, who we brought on in a trade this year to help our bullpen, will help. Jose Ortega, who we had on a very good contract, is a starting pitcher for us during the regular season, also a free agent. And Chase Crawford, who was our closer last year, also a free agent, as well as Alex Alvarez, who was our starting catcher until we made the trade to bring on Julio Diaz. So we're going to have a lot of holes to fill with this team. Before we get into arbitration and making those decisions on the big pending free agents that the team has, though, we're going to take a look back at the top performers from this 2054 three-peat season. Taking a look first at the stats for the team for the season, 97-65 record, as we talked about, which was actually 6 games below Pythagorean expectations. We had a losing record in extra innings as well as 1-run games, which probably drove part of that. We're excellent at home. We're good on the road. And we had a winning record every month except for June when we were 13-14. Offensively, playing half our games in cores absolutely helped. You can see we were first in the vast majority of offensive categories, including a crazy 331 home runs on the season, so more than 2 dingers a game for this team. Pitching, given that we play half our games in cores, was pretty strong also. 6th in the league in runs allowed, 6th in starter ERA, 5th in bullpen ERA. The most insane stat about this team to me is that we were 1st in the league in home runs allowed as far as a pitching staff, which for playing half of our games in cores still absolutely blows my mind. So awesome offense and a very good pitching staff with mediocre defense, which surprises me a bit given how much we have invested in good defenders over the years. But at least according to the advanced metrics, we were not all that great defensively. But when all was said and done, we are still World Series champions for a 3rd year in a row, and that's what I care about. Turning to the pitching staff, and we still actually have our 4-man playoff rotation set up, but our ace, Dave Alvarado, had kind of a down year, was only 12-11 in a 5.48 ERA. He still was somehow named an all-star this year after a couple of really good seasons back-to-back. Did much better in the playoffs, though, and still will be back next year. As will Jose Vasquez, who was 18-6 with a 3.41 ERA over 200 strikeouts. Another lefty, Gus Duran, 17-8, 4.06 ERA. And then Javi Toledo, who I mentioned we have a team option on, was 11-8 with a 4.75 ERA. The 5th starter, or actually the 4th starter throughout much of the season, was Jose Ortega, who ended up 10-10 with a 5.22 ERA. Probably in a situation where we can only bring back one out of Toledo and Ortega, and think that I'm probably leaning towards Toledo being that person right now, but still time to figure that out. Chase Crawford, who has started for us in the past, relieved for us in the past, had a lot of injury issues in 2053, plugged him into the closer role permanently this year, and he did a really nice job. 33 saves, a 2.45 ERA, 72 strikeouts, over 69 2/3 innings pitched. He's a free agent, and he's looking for really big money. He wants to be a starter, looking for almost $21 million a year. Wants to be in the starting rotation. I think we could try to bring him back as a starter with the great movement and the extreme ground ball tendencies, throwing in the mid to high 90s. I think he'd still play pretty well in Colorado, but I've always preferred him as a reliever more than a starter because that curveball, that third pitch isn't quite up to major league levels. His stamina not quite as high as some of our other pitchers, but difficult decision there. And we're going to face another difficult decision with Tawase Adebamge, international free agent signing 2 seasons ago. And he hasn't been great. A 5.21 ERA with 35 saves when we tried to make him a closer for us the season before this one. This year he was more of a generalist arm out of the bullpen and a 5.08 ERA for us in 39 innings. So he just hasn't been real good, and we've got an option on him that we're going to need to figure out this season, this offseason right now. Would tend to think that we're going to be moving on from Adebamge. Jorge Maravilla came over in a trade with Milwaukee, did a really nice job for us down the stretch, helped propel us to the title. Elijah Smith, the rookie, was the 3rd overall pick in the draft back in 2050, and he had a great year for us out of the bullpen. He'd been a starter, obviously, with that profile coming up through the minor leagues, and with the fact that we could be moving on from the likes of Ortega, Adebamge, Chase Crawford, and even Javi Toledo this offseason, you would think that a spot in the rotation is going to open up for Elijah Smith finally for next year. But this year all he did was lead the National League with 74 games pitched in, 163 strikeouts and 115 2/3 innings, 3.27 ERA, and a 9-3 record with 3 saves, 2.18 Sierra, 3.5 WAR. I think that Elijah Smith is probably a strong candidate for Rookie of the Year and probably a decent candidate for Reliever of the Year. Doesn't always go to a guy with a ton of saves, and given the massive number of strikeouts and innings pitched in games he pitched in, I think he'll be a strong contender there. I think Jose Vasquez probably has an outside shot at the Cy Young Award also. So we're going to be simming up through award season and seeing what type of hardware these players collect after they collect their third straight World Series ring. Julio Sanchez is a guy we brought on this year as an international free agent. Had a solid year, 4-4, 3.65 ERA. Tyrone Colbert, brought him on board, 2-3 record, 2.73 ERA. And Danny Sedano, youngster who we finally brought up towards the end of the season, pitched 2 1/3 innings. Save talking about Will Lucio to the end. This is a guy who's done a really nice job for us as a spot starter in the past. Didn't get any starts this year and had kind of a rough year, 5.36 ERA, over 95 2/3 innings working out of the pen, 1-0 record with just 2 saves. So he was primarily a long reliever for us. Hopefully he can bounce back next year because, as I mentioned, with Toledo, Crawford, Adebamge, and Ortega, all players that are questionable whether they'll come back, and realistically we're probably only going to be able to afford 1, maybe 2 of them. Definitely feel like Lucio could have a more prominent role, possibly even in the starting rotation for us next year, along with Elijah Smith. Moving on to our offense, it was incredible this past season. As we've already talked about, hit over 2 home runs a game with the team, and had 5 players with over 40 home runs, including the great Elijah Moore, who hit 62 to lead the National League in homers for a 3rd straight year. So the offense did everything we could have hoped. Alex Alvarez was our starting catcher at the beginning of the year, hit 285 with 12 home runs. He was supplanted after we made a trade for the young star Julio Diaz, hit 256 with 10 homers for us and 227 at-bats. Alvarez is a free agent looking for around $6 million a year. That may be a bit rich for a backup catcher, and given that Julio Diaz is durable, younger, and still very good defensively, probably going to be moving on from Alvarez this offseason. Adam Fields, the designated hitter, who was a former Rule 5 pick from several years ago, I guess had a little bit of a down year compared to 2053, but when a down year is 292, 41 homers, 107 ribbies, we'll take it. Elijah Moore, as I said, just led the National League in homers for a 3rd straight year, topping the 61 he hit last year with 62 this season. He's finished 2nd in the MVP voting each of the last 2 seasons. The hope is that this monster season, leading the league in homers and ribbies once again, will finally get him an MVP award, but certainly no guarantees. You can see his OPS plus and his WRC plus and his WAR were all actually down from what he's done over the first 2 years, despite the gaudy home run and RBI numbers. Tony Encarnacion and Edgar Estrada are a couple of young infielders that Encarnacion is someone who came up in our system. Estrada is a Rule 5 pick from a couple of years ago. Both spent most of the year in AAA, but could certainly be helping us out more next season. Danny Ruiz, the starting second baseman, we signed him to a big free agent contract. Actually had a bit of a down year, similar to Adam Fields compared to 2053. 289 average, 14 homers, 73 ribbies. Still a productive offensive player, though, who is very versatile and pretty good defensively and also durable. So he's usually available, which is very important. Juan Castillo was a utility infielder for us this year, 225 average with 4 home runs, but has the versatility to start at second, third, or short in a pinch and play those positions respectively defensively, so still a valuable player to have around. Speaking of valuable players, shortstop Israel Mays had a real nice offensive year. We traded for him before the trade deadline last season. This year, his first full year with the team, 260 average, 27 homers, drove in almost 100 runs, scored 80 runs. A little below average in terms of his OPS plus, but for a solid defensive shortstop, he actually played third base more often than shortstop until we had some injuries in the postseason. Get into that shortly when we talk about our previous starting shortstop, but I do like his defensive versatility and his ability to contribute at multiple positions for us. Robbie Carrillo, what else is there to say? He had, we'll take a look in the 4 seasons he's been with Colorado, led the league in runs 3 times now, also won a batting title, led the league in triples a couple of times, led the league in hits once. 46 home runs, a career best this year. His 112 ribbies was the second highest of his career. 132 runs, the best he's ever scored. He opted out of his contract, as we talked about. He's an Iron Man looking for huge money, and he is coming off of an incredible playoff performance. We mentioned he won both the NLDS and the World Series MVPs this year, and in 12 games, he had 10 home runs, 24 ribbies, and hit almost 500. So a 308 OPS plus, 347 WRC plus, and a WAR of 1.8 in 12 games. Just an absolutely incredible offseason for him, and he's a big part of the reason that after taking 16 games to win the World Series in both 2052 and 2053, the Rockies only lost 1 game on the way to the World Series this year. And with the amount of money that Carrillo is looking for, and with the fact that we do have some pretty decent outfielders, we may have to move on from him this season. Obviously, it would be a huge loss, but we do have Angel Gomez, minor league free agent signing from a few years ago, who's a pretty solid 4th outfielder for us this year, hit 289, only 2 home runs and 201 at-bats. His power was definitely down from a year before. Good personality, pretty solid defensively, even though he doesn't have the best arm in the world. Eddie Farley, free agent signing from a couple of years ago. The only question about him is just staying healthy. He's normal in terms of his injury proneness, but you can see he's played 110 and 128 games for us, had multiple stints on the IL each season. When he's been in the lineup, though, pretty productive. Not the greatest batting average hitter in the world, 235 average this year, but 41 homers, 93 ribbies, and an excellent defensive center fielder. Speaking of excellent defensive center fielders, Hector Rivera is another youngster we signed as a minor league free agent a few years ago. Split the year this year between Albuquerque and Colorado, although most of it in Colorado, where he hit 279 with 6 homers. Tony Coffey, speaking of excellent defensive center fielders, a guy we picked up in a trade with the Mets, hit 248 with 7 homers and 137 ribbies, but there is certainly an argument that if we do need to move on from Carrillo, between the likes of Gomez, Rivera, and Coffey, we can cover left field. Perhaps not as incredibly as Carrillo has filled that spot for the last few years, but certainly more cost effectively. And then Bobby Perez in right field was the 5th of our players who had 40 or more homers this year, 287 average, 42 homers, and 101 ribbies. And he did that all in 121 games, as the fragile 28-year-old did have some serious injury issues this year, but a monster season while he was healthy. And as I've moved on to review the financials page here, starting to try to figure out what to do with those players that we've got some tough decisions to make on, did kind of notice one interesting thing. After that incredible 113 win last season, our winning percentage plunged by almost exactly 100 points this past season. I'd have to imagine that the Rockies are the first team in baseball history that won a World Series after their winning percentage plunged by 100 points between the last season and the season in which they won. Esoteric stat, and maybe I'm making it up, but was a pretty stark contrast to see that winning percentage of almost 700 last season, followed by the winning percentage of less than 600 this season. As I mentioned earlier, we don't have a ton of money to use right now. Carrillo's opted out of the contract. Tawase Adebamge, option year for $11.6 million, as we talked about. Although he has a good profile for Coors with his extreme ground ball tendency, his ground ball or pitcher type, decent movement on his pitches. He's almost 38 years old. He's fragile. And most importantly, he just hasn't been very good for us. So we are going to go ahead and void the last contract year there. And that obviously, I guess that didn't open up money for us. I mean, we did have to pay this year with the buyout that we gave him. But I would think that the money for extensions, which is kind of next year's money at this point, since we haven't totally flipped the year through free agency yet, would have gone up. But it is what it is. He is off the books one way or another. And then the other decision that we have to make is on Javi Toledo. And this one's definitely going to be more challenging. $18 million. He'd kind of been our fifth starter for the last few years. He's been a darn good fifth starter for us, winning 13-13 in 11 games. Check on what he's done for us in the playoffs also. You can see he was a reliever for us. He was our closer last year when he had been the fifth starter, and we moved him into the bullpen for the playoffs. And he went 1-1 with 6 saves and a 3.24 ERA in 16 2/3 innings last season. This season, only started 2 games as our fourth starter, but he was 1-0 with a 0.84 ERA. Of course, 2 years ago in the playoffs, he was awful in relief, 3 appearances and a 40.50 ERA. So I don't know that we're really getting to the answer of what we should do. I do like the fact that he's an Iron Man. He's got the captain personality, great movement on his pitches, great stamina, extreme ground ball tendencies. Only reservation is his age. He's going to be 36 shortly. And the fact that his third pitch, that sinker, is kind of average at this point, certainly could deteriorate a bit. But $18 million for Javi Toledo, when we look at the other potential starters that we have that we could be losing. Jose Ortega, looking for $17 million. He was supplanted as the fifth starter by by Toledo this year. Similar situation with Ortega, where that third pitch is a little questionable, doesn't have the same stamina, doesn't throw as hard, control not as good, does have that Iron Man, so we know he's going to be out there, but I think I prefer Toledo over Ortega for basically very similar money. And then Chase Crawford, as I talked about, I don't love that third pitch with him. And he's looking for almost $21 million a year to come back as a starter. So I think both of those guys are gone. While we're thinking about it, we're going to submit a qualifying offer to Carrillo. Maybe we submit a qualifying offer to Chase Crawford. If he's looking for, 20.6? 20.7 almost million a year for 5 years with a player option at the end. He's probably not going to accept a $18.9 million qualifying offer for 1 year, especially at age 34. He's looking for one last big contract. So I may roll the dice there and see if we can at least get a draft pick if he leaves. Ortega and Alvarez can't make the qualifying offers to them, but given that we're going to have, if we have Alvarado, Vasquez, and Duran back, if we extend Toledo, and then we slide Elijah Smith into the bullpen, we've basically got our starting rotation for next year. 4 lefties in the starting rotation, which is kind of unique, but it is time for Elijah Smith to get a chance to start consistently at the major league level. And then we move on from Crawford, Adabamge, and Ortega. So 3 key arms in our bullpen we'll be moving on from. And a 4th key arm, Elijah Smith, is going to go into the rotation. So it's definitely going to result in a somewhat weaker bullpen. But we do have some talent in the minors that can fill the gap and should be able to find some decent relievers through the trade market if we need, or on free agency that aren't all that expensive. So I think we are going to execute the option to bring Javi Toledo back. And now we've made the big decisions there. It's a matter of figuring out what we want to do in salary arbitration, and then we can sim through award season and see if any of these guys won some of those postseason or end of season awards that we were talking about, where we thought we'd have some candidates. And we made offers to most of our salary arbitration eligible players: reliever Will Lucio, catcher Julio Diaz, DH Adam Fields, shortstop Israel Mays, and right fielder Bobby Perez. Seeing Alex Ortega here reminded me that we didn't actually go over the two players who ended up on the IL during the World Series. Jordan Casares was our starting shortstop much of the year. Very good defensively. He's a 32-year-old who's fragile physically, but with that defensive profile, if he can continue hitting 326 or even 288 for us, very valuable player. So we'll be glad to have him back next year. Alex Ortega kind of moved into more of a utility role this year for us, or more of a platoon role, to be fair. He was our starting third baseman for a couple of seasons when he was coming up and younger. Had a 2053 season that was destroyed by injuries. In this year, he became our third baseman just against left-handed pitching, as we had Israel Mays, who ended up as our shortstop after the injury to Casares. But Israel Mays played third base against righties more often than not. So only 143 at-bats for Ortega. Did hit 301 with 12 homers in those 143 at-bats. But he's looking for, in the neighborhood of around $7 million in arbitration, or he's expected to get around $7 million in arbitration. He's looking for even more than that. As productive as he is against left-handed pitching, I think that is a contract that we may want to move on from. He's 30 years old, and he's definitely better against left-handed pitching than he is against right-handed pitching, but I think that we can probably find, particularly with some of those young infielders we had talked about, Tony Encarnacion and Edgar Estrada, people that can fill in for him at third against left-handed pitching pretty effectively. And obviously there is a choice. Once Casares is back at short, we could just make Mays a full-time third baseman, Ruiz full-time second baseman, and then we still have Juan Castillo, Estrada, and Encarnacion as potential utility infielders or maybe platoon mates. So I think it is probably time to see what we can get for Alex Ortega in trade, rather than spending $6.5 to $7.5 million on him next year as a 30-year-old who's really only going to be playing against left-handed pitching unless we have injuries. And it looks like we can trade Alex Ortega to the Red Sox for a couple of middling prospects. Nobody that exciting. Second baseman Jaden Murphy, soon to be 24-year-old, played in Double-A last year where he hit 284. Not really much of a defensive player and not really an incredible offensive player either, as well as reliever Billy Fuentes, spent last year in Double-A also. He's fragile. He's almost 26 years old. So I may be being charitable in even calling these players prospects, but at least it's something that we're bringing onto our system. I just don't think playing a guy who's on the side of the platoon where he's going to play a quarter of the games, paying that guy like that around $7 million just doesn't make sense to me, and that'll free up a little more money for us to fill some of the other holes that I've talked about that we're going to develop this off season. So we're going to go ahead and complete that trade, move on from Mr. Ortega. Thank you for your service as our third baseman over the years. And now we're starting to at least free up a little bit of money to hopefully be players in free agency this year. And with the arbitration offers that we want to be out there, now out there, qualifying offers made to Carrillo and Crawford, and we're going to move on from Ortega and Alvarez. $6 million for a backup catcher just seems like a luxury we probably can't afford. Although I do like him defensively, and as a backup catcher, he's really interesting. Guess we'll see quickly what the upcoming free agents at catcher potentially look like. and he's right near the top of the list, and he's actually looking for a lot less money than the other guys who could be on the market. Our old buddy Max Haynow, also going to be a free agent. If he doesn't hate us, we could try to bring him back. He was with us for part of last year, and then we traded him away to Miami in that trade for Julio Diaz. But I think we'll let him hit free agency. Certainly would think between Alvarez and Haynow, if we could get either of those guys to be Diaz backup for next year, that would be a pretty nice catching tandem for us. But don't feel like we have to chase Alvarez before he hits free agency. I don't think. Still looking for almost $6 million a year. If we can get him for less, we'll throw an offer out there. But he's going to want to be guaranteed the starting lineup. I don't think we're going to get him, but we'll give it a shot. All right, we'll see how this goes. Alvarez was looking for $5.9 million a year over 4 years, with a player option in the final season and a guaranteed role as a starting catcher. We're giving him 4 years at less than $5.4 million a year with a team option in the final season, and we're not guaranteeing him a starting role. And we're also paying him significantly less than he was looking for the first 3 years of the contract, which are really the guaranteed years. So I don't think he's going to go for this, but if he won't go for this, we'll let him hit free agency. Actually, he's willing to think about it. So definitely going to be expensive for a backup catcher, but we know that he's probably a starting quality catcher. We love his defense. So definitely feel like we're in a position where to have a backup catcher as good as he is a luxury. And with Diaz's durability, I don't think there's going to be a lot of injuries there, but it does give us a really nice insurance policy if we're able to sign him for that contract. And we have started signing guys here at the end of October. Alvarez signed the deal. Fields and Lucio and Bobby Perez and Israel Mays and Julio Diaz all signed contracts to avoid arbitration, and the fans were excited by all of those contracts. So obviously our fan interest, which was already 100, is now way over 100, which will hopefully help us in the off season, because we've taken care of the arbitration eligible players right now, but certainly losing Ortega, Crawford, and especially Robbie Carrillo, who is extremely popular and obviously a great force. The fans won't be happy if and when those things happen. And we're now headed into awards season. Doesn't look like we won any gold gloves, and doesn't look like we won the reliever of the year. We'll check to see if perhaps the youngster Elijah Porky Smith got some votes for it or not. But Silver Sluggers, not a shock that we've got at least one winner there. Elijah Moore at first base, least surprising news in the world other than Robbie Carrillo in left field. Only 2 Silver Sluggers, so a bit surprising given the massive offense that the Colorado Rockies put up this year, but they probably do take into account the home park that we play our games in Coors, and the positive benefit that home playing field has on the numbers that a lot of these players put up. But good to see both Elijah Moore and Robbie Carrillo with Silver Sluggers for this year. Best NL reliever. Actually, I may have overestimated things for Elijah Smith, despite that crazy season with 163 strikeouts and over 100 innings out of the bullpen. He didn't even get a single vote for reliever of the year. Chase Crawford did, 2.45 ERA with 33 saves, but the winner was Victor Duque of Milwaukee, 41 saves and a 2.21 ERA, 93 strikeouts over 73 and a third innings pitched. His 3.5 WAR was less than Elijah Smith's, though. Heriberto Velez, 2.8 WAR lower, but he had 31 saves. And then obviously Chase Crawford's WAR of 2.7 was lower, but 33 saves. So certainly looks like racking up a bunch of saves is what the voters for the reliever of the year are looking for. So that worked a little bit against Elijah Smith. We'll see whether someone who is used primarily as a middle reliever and setup man can have a chance at Rookie of the Year tomorrow. And no win for the Rookie of the Year either. Elijah Smith did get one vote. I feel like his season was definitely underestimated. He did win 9 games. Only 3 saves I get, but 163 strikeouts in 115 and 2/3 innings. Pitched more games in relief than anyone in the league. 3.5 WAR, pretty darn impressive. 218 SIERA. At least he did get a vote for Rookie of the Year, but Rookie of the Year goes to William Harton of the Braves. 273 average, 17 homers, 81 ribbies, and a 2.9 WAR. So a nice, respectable rookie season for the center fielder Harton, but definitely feel like Elijah Smith has been underestimated a bit in the voting for both Rookie of the Year and Reliever of the Year. And now we're down to the last 3 awards. Manager of the Year, where we should have a pretty good contender with Hartman, although, as I talked about, going from 113 wins to 97 wins, not going to be surprised if he doesn't get it. Cy Young Award, think Vasquez is a potential candidate to at least get some votes. And then MVP, we'll see if after back-to-back second-place finishes, leading the league in home runs for a 3rd consecutive year, with a crazy 62 homers, we'll finally get Elijah Moore over the hump there. And Casares is back and healthy, so that is nice to see. And Hartman did get a Manager of the Year again, so nice run for him. 3 straight World Series victories now. And he is now won Manager of the Year each of those seasons as well. And we got another note. I'm guessing it can't be. It is Cy Young Award. So Jose Vasquez, I thought he had a chance on the margin to get there. And Jose Vasquez does get the NL Cy Young Award. Led the league with 18 wins, 18-6 record, 209 strikeouts, and almost 200 innings pitched, a 3.41 ERA. His 5.4 WAR was the best in the National League. So the 30-year-old left-hander caps off a 3rd straight World Series championship with the Cy Young Award, even though he hasn't been named an All-Star since 2051. So he's never been an All-Star in his 3 years in Colorado, but he is a 3-time World Series champ and now a Cy Young Award winner. And Gus Duran, our 17-game winner, who's been here for 2 years now, or a year and a half after he made that big trade with Cleveland following the injury to Rogelio Loera, led the league in walks per 9 and strikeout to walk ratio, and got a little bit of love for the Cy Young Award as well. So we've got the best manager, we've got the Cy Young Award winner. Will Elijah Moore finally get over the hump and be named the National League MVP? And is not to be the case. We didn't get a special email on it, so guessing he probably finished second once again. Yep, second once again. Elijah Moore, this time behind Edgar Gonzalez of the Nationals, 3rd baseman. Did have a pretty impressive year, won the batting title, hitting .362, led the league with 220 hits, 113 runs, 44 doubles, 36 homers, 124 ribbies, 7.6 WAR, the best in the National League. Doesn't look like he's an exceptional defensive 3rd baseman, but certainly respectable out there at 3rd base. And Robbie Carrillo was 4th in the voting. Bobby Perez, the right fielder, got some votes. Eddie Farley, the center fielder, got some votes. Jose Vasquez, the Cy Young Award winner, got some votes. But Elijah Moore, his 3rd consecutive year where he is second in the National League MVP voting, despite putting up some pretty gaudy numbers for Colorado and with his Iron Man injury proneness, he's basically been out there every day for the past 3 seasons, doing the job for the team, but still not a MVP at this point in his career. And with awards season done, we're just going to sim ahead through salary arbitration, find out if Crawford and or Carrillo accept their qualifying offers. I know Carrillo will not, since he opted out of a contract making over $30 million this upcoming season. And I think it's unlikely that Crawford will opt in either. We'll see what he's looking for at this point. Yeah, still $20.7 million over 5 years. So I'd be a little surprised if he opts in also. Again, there's a chance we would look to bring one or both of these players back in free agency if we continue to make some other moves and free up some more cash. But I think it's unlikely that they're going to accept those qualifying offers. So if we do end up losing them, at the very least, hopefully we'll get some draft pick compensation. And as expected, both Carrillo and Chase Crawford did decline our qualifying offers. So they are going to be headed for the free agent market, where we will potentially consider re-engaging with one or both of them to bring them back. Take a look at the international free agents on the market at a high level. Omar Portillo, not going to be great in Colorado. Bill Mireles could be a decent guy to bring on to the minor league system. 22 years old, definitely not ready for the majors yet, but a pretty interesting glove. Certainly will at least offer a minor league contract to him to get the discussion going, and then request a scouting report on Mr. Mireles to see what he really is. And the big-time free agents, not a surprise. See Arabi Carrillo right on the list of the big players that are out there. Starting pitcher Bobby Rosado, extreme ground ball tendencies, good in the clubhouse, great movement on his pitches. Another left-hander, but that could be a interesting guy to chase after. Certainly seems Willie Rosas, we don't really need a first baseman. Jesus Serrano, catcher, looking for crazy money. Certainly would be nice, but we've kind of decided to build around Diaz. Veteran third baseman and Tony Soto. Second baseman, a veteran, and Gilberto Romero. And then shortstop Danny Briones. Incredible defensively. And a pretty good contact hitter. Doesn't strike out. Great speed, great bunter. Just has no home run power whatsoever, but is still, last year 293 average, 48 doubles, 6 triples. Real interesting player. Certainly a franchise-type shortstop. A little surprised that he's only won 2 Gold Gloves with those 80 ratings across the board at shortstop. So some interesting players out there for potential free agency. And we'll have a little bit of money to spend to improve our team, but we definitely have some holes to fill now. So it would be a interesting free agency period for the Rockies if we continue to move forward with this sim. But as we've talked about, with OOTP 24 being out right now, we wanted to get the sim set up. So if we decide to jump back into it someday in the future, let's say that, and we'll cross our fingers that this isn't the case, but OOTP 24 is incredibly buggy for a period of many months, and you can't really start a long-term sim. Maybe we'll jump back into the Rockies. But otherwise, we are going to conclude the Rockies playthrough here. And we've still got one episode left, though, that we're going to do where we kind of recap the whole history of the 33 years that we've been playing in OOTP 23 over the past close to a year at this point. It's been a really good run. You can see we started out with Kansas City. We won 5 World Series there, including 3 in a row. Then we moved on to Pittsburgh, where we were a perennial contender. Lost a couple of World Series there, never got the job done. and then the last 6 years here in the Colorado, which were punctuated by the back-to-back three-peat in the World Series over the last 3 seasons. So 26 playoff appearances over 33 years with those 3 franchises. And we'll do another episode that we will post tomorrow morning, Sunday morning, hopefully, kind of covering the saga of OOTP 23, the good decisions we made, the poor decisions we made, how the teams ultimately performed. And we'll also take a look back at about a dozen of the key players through our runs in Kansas City, Pittsburgh, and Colorado, and take a look at how their careers ended up turning out, since it's been a while since we've checked in on some of those names that will be familiar to those of you who watched us over the past year. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.